Hi, welcome to the unedited, uncut version of me reading the rough draft to a story I'm writing entitled Username Skiff. Chapter 1. The hum of the Gentek monitor was annoying. It was a dull, static tone that seemed to linger in the air, not unlike the spinning wings of a mosquito, and probably the only other thing just as rampant in Gorochi. One monitor was sound enough, but walk into most any net cafe, and the air would be swarming with the sound. Gin-ball players, chatbot jockeys, fencers, matrix runners, though if you were stupid enough to attempt to run in a public cafe, you'd very quickly find yourself under the heel of an IRA, interpersonal relations agent, begging them not to crush your tech along with your scalp. To Genda, the hum was like a lullaby. A reminiscent whir of the uterus, the place that he spent almost every waking minute of his free time. Even the time that he wasn't free, Genda was probably still keyed into his Gentek, making runs for some skis on the Lower East. His territory didn't stretch far, but it didn't matter. People knew Genda, or more non-specifically, they knew his user ID, Skiff. The net had no bounds. Most of the time, he'd deny an in-person meet, unless the circumstances absolutely called for it. Decryption, repurposing, Gentek repairs, modifications. He tried to stay useful and make his yen where he could. People around Gorochi were notoriously untrustworthy, not something particularly surprising. August 20th, 2083 was one of those days, though, where Skiff showed face. Genda didn't deny his paranoia over being jumped for his tech. Some dumb thug had tried to rip his data or get hands on his personal Gentek more times than he could count. So meetups occurred in public, more specifically at Nan's Netcaf. Nan was an old friend of Genda's, and beyond that, owed Genda on more than one occasion for bailing him out of an almost certain IRA raid on the joint for amateur net security ignorance. Genda kept the ice heavy for Nan, and in return, Nan's was Genda's personal meet and greet venue. Nan wasn't the most loyal, but who was in Gorochi? Everyone was corrupt. Just last week, Skiff had wiped a rape case from an IRA's own internal recording device, not something he was particularly proud of, but one more favor he could cash in on a later date. Today, however, it was Nan's favor he was redeeming. He sat in the back corner, wearing a burner coat he'd just scooped earlier that day. The colored contacts in his eyes were burning, his scalp was itching from the coarse bleached blue wig he'd copped from a body shop a few blocks down. Both were discomforts he'd only have to endure until the end of the day, just enough to ensure a semblance of anonymity. It was a simple data wipe job. The chat service the client used the day before was being accessed from an encrypted source, which Genda quickly unfolded as Finnan's Netcaf, Upper West Side of Gorochi. The guy was an amateur net surf at least, which was both a comfort and a certain risk. He was requesting a deletion of certain site logs. Apparently, he was being tracked by some gangsters trying to snag data from his site deck. Skiff tried explaining that wiping the site deck footage likely wouldn't hold ground with a group of gangsters, but his client, user ID ArcEnter, was still adamant. Skiff offered to wipe it then and there, over the net, but ArcEnter didn't want his site deck being entered via the net, which did make a certain amount of sense. Plugging in and opening that gate over the net might make it susceptible to outside intrusion, and if he really was being cased by some street, they might take advantage. Before meeting anyone, Genda made a habit to case the client himself. The night before, he'd taken a look into ArcEnter. As amateur as the client seemed, Genda was surprised to find his site deck ice incredibly thick. Certain sects usually put heavy ice on subjects of importance, be them government agents, scientists, people dealing with sensitive data, or objects of importance. ArcEnter was decked out with some state-of-the-art wall service. It was Wayland Yuha ice code, one Skiff had encountered many times previously. Wayland Yuha built organ printers, printed organs direct. Their product wasn't cheap. Weyland Yuha was a frequent supplier of military-grade organs for government personnel, and even more notably of top-tier eyes, specifically reserved for high-class recipients, or copped secondhand by some yen-rich gangsters, meaning Skiff had encountered their code from previous site deck mining jobs on several different occasions. But Arkenter's code was different. At its core, it was Weyland Yuha ice, but deeper, there were walls that not even internal Weyland Yuha code could bypass. It was unquestionably modified, but ice this thick wasn't typical from Gorochi Street. Not this intricate. Genda wanted to get his eyes on this user himself, maybe as much as the user wanted to case Genda. Arkenter was late. Genda's eyes were starting to throb, the pulsing of his veins catching on the edge of his colored contacts. As if having organics wasn't already a pain enough, his retinas were in need of a replacement years ago, but the prospect of having his vision policed like his upcoming client kept him from ever wanting implants, at least for as long as he could bear to see. 11/22/32. Genda looked up after hearing Nan's tell, a cough and a shoulder adjustment that notified Genda that someone of interest had entered the netcaf. Nan followed the thin, dark visage with a watchful eye, his leathered skin pulsing from the light of the broken neon sign outside the entrance window to his left. Genda watched the figure approach Nan, asking for a 4ZA deck, a nonsense code Genda had told him to ask for. Nan pointed a rusted digit towards the back of the bar. Genda watched closely for any signs that this figure was planning something other than a simple deck wipe. Hands in pockets, bulky items, that sort of thing. Nan kept one hand down on his lap, out of sight, holding only what him and Genda knew to be a stainless steel Tensen 40. The figure sat at the Gentech deck next to Genda and cleared his throat. "Payment before or after?" said Genda. "That's fine. I would prefer it to be that way," the man said. His voice was faint, tired, but not scared. He looked straight ahead at the buzzing monitor in front of him. "How long do you suppose it will take?" he asked. Genda booted up his key rig. "Depends how much you've seen, I guess." Genda pulled a lil pin mint from his pocket and tossed it into his mouth. "Just get comfortable. You're not going to be able to see while I do this, but I'll be needing your assistance in the ice bypass. Do you want a mint?" "This place is secure?" The man turned a concerned look back at Nan, who gave a stiff wink back at him. "Walled it myself," Genda said, rubbing his eyes. He turned and marked Nan, staring bullets into Arkenter. He nodded a dismissive gesture towards Nan and turned to his client. "Don't worry about him. He's the physical wall. We're good here, trust me." The man adjusted in his chair and let out a labored breath. "Trust. Yeah." Weyland Yuha eyes left a small pinhole insert on the outside edge of each eye. With a proprietary cable, these inserts can be plugged into in order to access the data, test efficacy, police users. Most recipients that could afford this tech were either already the law or had some means to build ice between them and Weyland Yuha surveyors. There was no destroying the recording altogether, a feature that came much to the chagrin of most every user. But Weyland Yuha made heaps of cash off of data collection, more than organ sales would ever make them. Genda didn't mind the profit from the data mining and deletion game himself. Arkenter winced as the pin insert slid into his right eye. The eye itself didn't have nerve receptors, but the prospect of putting a needle into the side of an eyeball was means enough to make most people squirm. Genda plugged the cord into his Gentech. He held the second pin to the man's left eye. "No turning back, pal. You sure about this?" The man's leg was bouncing. "Yes," he said through a weathered throat. Get rid of it. All right. Get comfy then, going black. And with that, Genda slid the thin rod into Arkenter's left eye and began. Lil-Pin mints were spiked with a hint of a mental accelerant not unlike the pharmaceutical amphetamines most all of Gorochi workforce was addicted to. Not unlike them because technically they used the same drug. The dosage in a Lil-Pin mint was just small enough to be legal, but when taken at the rate by which Genda chomped them down, there was really no need to get signed to the big pharma alternative. They tasted better, made your breath smell great, and most of all, they fooled the user out of thinking that they had a genuine amphetamine addiction. Genda volleyed his sixth Lil-Pin from one side of his mouth to the other, a parallel to his motions on Arkenter's sight deck ice grid. Genda had entered his flow state. He hopped from one line of code to the next, surfing between numbers, tabs, his cursor dancing across the screen, his fingers gliding across keys, deleting and stroking in digits one after the other. Skiff. He scratched at his irritated scalp, throwing a quick glance over at Arcenter, who sat rigid, legs still bobbing, smoking a cigarette, blind as a bat. Genda tossed the blue wig down on the desk and ran both hands through his greased black hair, chewed down on the last of Mint 6, rubbed it into his gums with his tongue, and popped a seventh. Another hour had passed before Genda hit the edge. Just one simple line of code standing between him and Arkenter's encrypted site log. He keyed in the remaining digits. Then, files unfolded. Years of site logs. The hum of Genda's Gentech hiked, the fan inside spinning frantically in an attempt to meet the data influx. Genda watched the site deck files pour down on his monitor. Images of people, faces, nude bodies, white walls, dark spaces, and mirrors. Arkenter's most personal recollections that not even he would be able to remember all of. Genda's voyeuristic kink whispered to him from the back of his mind. The right side of his mouth curled upwards. He was in. Ark, wake up, Genda said, snapping a finger in his client's ear. I'm awake. Good, I'm in. What day are we wiping? You need to be specific. The man thought for a moment. August 19th, 2083, the entire day. The entire day? Are you sure? Yes. The entire day goes. He watched Arcenter take a long drag from his most recent smoke and blindly extinguish it on the edge of the desk. Genda keyed the data coordinates. The excess files filtered off screen, leaving only the site deck logs listed for 8/19/2083. Genda peered across the files. Delete it, Arcenter requested again, his tone stiff. Genda's eyes swept across the files. The voice in the back of his head whispered to him. He traced his cursor across the timeline. Images of a stark room, lights, many bright lights. A hand, a pulse. Arkenter's hands began to rise towards his face. I still remember, the man said. I won't wait much longer before I pull. Delete it. Now. Then the voice in Genda's head cawed, a shrill cry that shot sparks into his veins, pulsing from the base of his skull over his scalp, raising each hair and swelling the vessels in his bloodshot eyes. And with a deft hand that could only have done this innumerable times before, he keyed an encrypted folder, slid the files down into it, slid the folder into a chip, and then out from the drive deck of his custom Gentech, he slid the chip into his underwear. And with the other hand, he swiftly deleted the client's entire memory from the day of August 19th, 2083. Chapter 2. Instead of the bleach blue-haired net surf named Skiff he had met only hours previous, Arkenter's vision faded in from the black to find the time-worn face of one Nan Vernon, grinning his classic fuck you smile. All done, bucko. How your eyes feeling? Arcenter was perplexed, but he would go on to say that his vision felt good. He would thank Nan for his services, and he would give him the payment that they'd agreed on. See, to Arkantar, there was no longer any bleached blue-haired net serf. As a matter of fact, there was hardly any recollection from the time he'd requested the Forzier deck from Nan to his current standing. Of course, Arkantar was aware that his memory of the last 2 hours had likely been non-consensually nixed, along with the rest of the requested deck wipe service he had initially come for, a liberty he by no means was happy about. But Nan's leathery grin was by no means an invitation to discuss the matter. So instead, Arkantar paid his bill, stood up, and with a firm metal-handed pat on the back, Nan watched him leave his net calf. Genda was already on the other side of town. The Lil Pen accelerants were starting to wane, which made him want a drink to cut the edge. But the drink would have to wait. Hitting a bar, hauling a custom Gentech on your back was an easy way to get jumped, let alone walking the streets with it. Leaving it at Nan's after a job was just not in the cards, even if he had wiped Arkantar's memory of the last 2 hours. If Arkantar had the guts to report Nan, the IRAs would jump at the opportunity to case the place, and Genda wasn't about to give them anything to go off of. His apartment was a shabby nook on the 12th floor of a shithole building in the Cian Square public hub block. Gorochi didn't have the room to separate commerce from living, not as if they were trying to avoid it. So Genda found himself living above one of the loudest shopping hub blocks in the entire city. The positives? Cheap as all hell. The negatives? Having to walk through a crowd of rip-screaming market-goers every time he made his way home. He'd gotten fairly accustomed to blocking out the noise. There were food stalls, markets, tech stops, repairs, augment stations, massage parlors, strip clubs, clothing stores. You name it, it was for sale or looking to be bought. Yen and hub blocks flowed like water, but people who lived in them were poor as street trash. Genda found it remarkable that tourists even bothered visiting Gorochi anymore. And even more surprising that they'd made their way to Cian Square on the East Edge. By now, most of the salespeople recognized Genda as a non-interested prospect, though many of them were on full auto and hardly even saw a face before barking their pitch. They just screamed into the flow, hoping to find a deep pocket to fish. Genda pushed his way through the crowd, head down, passing shouting stall tenants, avoiding passing glances of interested techies eyeing his gear, hands pushing food samples and street pharma in his face, begging him to try a sample. Most days, he could make it to the elevator without interacting once, without breaking stride. But again, today was one of those days. It was one of those days where out from the clamor of the block, he heard that damned voice call his name. What's the rush, Gen? He slowed his step. Damn. His grip tightened on the strap of his Gentech pack, readjusting it on his shoulder as he turned to meet her eyes. I like the blue, she said, laughing that classic gentle giggle that lopped Genda's heart into his throat. Had a job, he said, pinching the colored contacts from his eyes. He was surprised he'd forgotten, considering how uncomfortable they were. He felt the veins in his eyes expand and gave a couple of blinks to relax them, tossing the contacts on the ground. Tech boy Guinea out making a little yen, huh? Looking to spend it? I thought you didn't charge me anymore. Well, you could buy me a drink at least. If you just want a drink, I have plenty of free booze upstairs. The words slipped out before Genda even realized. She always had this way with him. Out on the streets, Genda felt like a phantom. He was skiff, a shadow criminal, a veteran net serf. But with Quinn, he was reduced to a puddle of adolescent nerves and mistaken identity. Me come up to your apartment? For a free drink? What an honor. She walked up to Genda and grabbed the key rig from his left hand with a smirk, and made her way for the elevator. Well, I was planning to have a drink anyways, Genda thought, following Quinn's effortlessly confident stride in an all-too-metaphorical manner. Quinn plopped down on Genda's couch, releasing a subtle cloud of dust into the stale air of the apartment. "Don't you ever open a window and air this place out?" She wafted the air, fanning the dust cloud from her eyes. Genda ignored her prodding, focusing on pouring 2 cups of some Japanese mystery booze he'd gotten the week before from a data trade with the Yakuza. His hands were shaking. He threw back a shot and refilled his glass before re-entering the living room. "So what's new again?" "Same shit, I guess," he said, sitting down on the floor in front of the couch. Quinn took her cup from him, smelled the liquor. "It smells fancy." "Got it from some Yakuza last week. Said it was worth like 100 yen or something if I wanted to sell it, but I figured I'd give it a try. Why not?" "And you're sharing. That's certainly new." She smiled and clinked her cup on Genda's. "So, what's up? Why are you after me today?" Genda asked over the rim of his glass. Quinn swallowed her sip, shrugging. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I don't know. You haven't talked to me in like weeks, so why today?" "Week. It's been a week again." Damn, that's it? She was right. And once again, Genda felt his gut turn in embarrassment. Why was she so good at this? He took another large gulp from his drink, letting it burn a warm calm down his throat before talking again. "Okay. Why have you been ignoring my chats?" "Because I've been busy. It's just been a crazy week." Genda watched her talk, transfixed by her mouth, her lips, her fingers skimming through her unkempt mess of hair. He tried to focus on her words. "All these suits from Kian came through, some business expo thing up the line, so yeah, it was busy." She looked down at her glass, taking a tentative sip. Genda tried his best to look unaffected by what she'd said, but she knew how it made him feel. He didn't like what she did. The problem was, it wasn't that unique. If Genda wanted a girl in his social class who worked in a different field, he'd be hard-pressed. Probably 1 in 4 women in Gorochi not working in the corporate world resorted to selling sex. The city was known for its brothels, and not for bad reason. For the most part, it had become a fairly legitimate business for people to get involved in. Sex in Gorochi was safer than it had ever been, thanks to readily available services, things like synthetic lining for both female and male genitalia, virtually invisible dermis that made the transfer of STDs via penetration nearly impossible. Even in a worst-case scenario, STD meds and birth control options in Gorochi were cheap and just about as easy to access as nabbing a pack of Lil Pens. But it was hardly the safety of it that bothered Genda. He was the jealous type, though he wasted all the energy he could muster trying to bullshit his indifference to Quinn. She knew her line of work disappointed Genda, but that's what paid her rent. That's what kept her fed. And that's also the only reason her and Genda ever met in the first place, regardless of how much he tried to separate himself from the rest. He didn't like to consider himself just another client, though the voice in the back of his head often worked to remind him. "Sorry," Quinn said, adjusting herself on the couch. She raised her face from her glass, pushing tendrils of frizz from her face. Genda feigned a casual shrug. "It's fine," he said. She looked at him, cocking her head to the side. She sighed a tired breath of equal parts annoyance and genuine empathy for Genda. Quinn was a sex worker, often keeping emotional distance from clients, but she was far from detached from her humanity. It was actually that very comforting intrigue that kept her in demand. "Can you at least look at me when you say it?" Genda watched his face waver in the reflection of his drink, marking how pathetic he looked in that moment. "Hey." He looked up to find Quinn on the floor, eye level with him, on her hands and knees. I'm sorry. Really. He stared at her, eyes tired. There was no world where Genda didn't accept her apology. He was weak for her, dependent on her love in a way not unlike a child to the breast. Gorochi was shit. His job was shit. His diet and his friends and his self-image were all shit. Quinn was comfort, even if it only came in waves. It's okay, he said, a weak smile inching its way up the sides of his mouth. She looked back at him, partially rolling her eyes. Okay, I'll buy it. She crawled closer to him, inching up to his face. Her hair brushed up against both sides of his head, creating a darkened tunnel between their faces. She smiled. Hi. Genda let the sides of his mouth inch up a bit higher. Hello. Your breath smells nice today. Genda felt a genuine laugh escape him. Damn this girl. Lil Pins. That classic Genda scent. She inched a bit closer. Mind if I taste? Genda stayed still, a boyish smirk still resting across his face. He looked into her eyes. You could always tell when someone had organics. Aside from the pinholes in Wayland Yuha's or the microscopic IIN numbers embedded in Kenters or the obviously unnatural colors of Gentique implants, there was something about an organic eye that was just inherently apparent. A pure, uninterrupted path from the viewer to the view, and looking back in, it seemed to be the same. He pondered this, looking in at Quinn, and looking back at him through her tunnel of hair, she did the same. Genda's smile faded into a placid smirk. He loved her, though he'd never allow himself to admit it. He'd known her for less than a year, but in moments like now, as her forehead fell gently against his, as her lips pushed delicately into his own, there was no question. He was hers, as much as he dreaded the fact. But a fact it was, and he did little to change it. Instead, putting his drink down and slowly lifting his hands to touch her skin, tracing the lines of her body with his fingers. In a world so rigid, so metallic, covered in rust and sharp and shit-stained rock, the smooth curves of Quinn's body were a feeling Genda would die for. He thought it every time he touched her, and now, as his fingers blindly pressed into her, her tongue gentle on his, he reaffirmed the sentiment. Yeah, tastes good too, she said, smiling down at him. She'd made her way into his lap, straddling him, her fingers sifting through his hair. You need to take a shower, she said, rubbing a stripe of hair grease across his forehead. Yeah, we do, Genda said, an adolescent smile returning to his lips. She smirked back at him. Lead the way, net boy. Genda awoke to the distant clamor of the market, as he did every morning. He turned to his side, following the light from his window down across Quinn's hips, up her arm, her shoulder, to the waves of her hair, hectic as the streets below. In moments like this, he dreamt of everything falling away. He wanted this to be space. He wanted the day to never come, for the world outside to go void, for Quinn to roll over and kiss him so fully that he forgot about every moment of his life until that point. Of course, this would remain a dream, because soon, just as every time before, Quinn would wake up and head out the door to let some yen-rich suit fuck her in exchange for some of his money, while Genda would pop a lil pin, force himself out of bed, and boot up his Gentek to check his chat for any new jobs. He sighed, louder than intended, rousing Quinn to turn onto her back. Her eyes parted lazily, and she smiled, the sunlight pouring over the curves of her breasts. Genda felt himself dreaming again. Morning, she said, scratching her scalp. Hey, Genda said, turning onto his side to face her. "How'd you sleep?" "Best I've slept all week," she said. The words left a warm dread in Genda's stomach. She stretched out her arms, sitting up. "What time is it?" Genda glanced over at his clock. 8:22:12. "About 8:30, he said, preparing himself for the typical early departure. "Good," she said, standing up. Genda thought about how stupid he was, transfixed by something as simple as a girl putting on her underwear. Nevertheless, he was, and he was sure anyone else would be with a girl like Quinn. She pulled her shirt down over her hair, running her hands through it after, teasing it back into shape. She fell back down on the bed, once again standing on all fours over Genda. "Thanks for inviting me up last night." "Sure. And sorry again for being so distant." "It's all right," Genda said, throwing out yet another weakly convincing smile. He knew it looked fake, but he didn't really care. He wasn't trying to make her feel bad, to win pity. It was just the truth. And though he spent all of his time lying, faking, and conning his way through Gurochi, he still couldn't manage to get away with a single lie to Quinn's face. It didn't get to her much, though, the guilt. She was past feeling bad about how she made her money, a self-affirmation she made long before meeting Genda. "Well, you know where to find me," she said, kissing him and pushing herself up off the mattress. "Maybe next time don't depend on a chat log if you want to see me so bad." "I don't have the yen for that, and you know it," she scoffed, kicking his wrinkled underwear from the ground towards his face. "We can figure something out," she said, turning for the door, waving back over her shoulder. "Later, Genny." "Later," Genda said, watching the door slide shut behind her. He lied in the stillness of the room for a long moment after, staring at the ceiling, contemplating the entirety of his existence. One step he'd forgotten in the usual post-Quinn routine. Though this time, he found himself interrupted by the glint of something that seemed to wink at him from within the wrinkled underwear that sat on his chest. The sunlight from the window moved across his chest again, and the glint reappeared. Genda picked up the briefs, shaking them out, and down onto his chest fell a thin blue memory chip. Chapter 3. The first couple of hours were black. Sleep. Of all the things the world had learned to police, all the places recorded and documented, dreams were still a freely wandered space. The only place that people could truly escape to, though some even gave up their ability to dream by installing various brain augments, a prospect Genda sometimes debated the idea of. His dreams were often dark, sad, reminiscent of people he'd lost, places he'd left, both of which were many. He watched the black for longer than he should have, finding in it a sort of tranquility. The sound of Arkenter's breathing was a calm and steady whir, like the slow waves on shore. Genda thought about the last time he'd been to the beach, the dead porpoise he'd seen that day, laying still atop the omni-colored oil puddle on shore. He didn't miss it, the coast, but the sounds still brought him a semblance of nostalgia. At timestamp 5:28:6, the void parted, revealing the ceiling of a darkened room. It was nice, not too fancy, but a decent-sized space. The view blinked, turned to the side, revealing an empty bed. Genda wasn't surprised to find that the man who called himself Arkenter lived alone. He scrubbed forward past the expected morning routine, marking the noteworthy size of Arkenter's manhood as he sped along the side deck log. No wonder the man had an ego. He searched for the white room, the one he'd seen a flash of before the one he'd seen flash before him on screen at Nan's. 15:42:19. He stopped. Arkenter was entering a lab, likely independently owned, being that the building was far from the size of the gargantuan corporate cultivation centers found throughout Gorochi. He hit play, watching Arkenter's sight deck at normal speed. The view panned past a lab, watching Arkenter's... The view panned past a lab harboring multiple organ printers, a few casings of ears, eyes, various organs along its walls. The view carried Genda to a monitor, where two hands began keying in a password that Genda made quick work to document. The hands proceeded to hit enter, the eye line panning upwards, quickly back behind, and then towards a door that slid open to reveal a stark white room. Genda thought of all the cliches, all the bullshit predictions of a sterile, porcelain future from years past, and how comically accurate this room made them seem. Arkenter's vision brought Genda through the doors, moving quickly towards a glass, gray-colored bell jar-shaped casing, about a foot in diameter, 2 feet tall. It was connected to a larger apparatus, a machine that seemed to be pumping liquid into it in a breath-like rhythm. Arkenter's vision kept sweeping backwards in quick flashes, then back to the apparatus, keying in various commands to the display on its side. The glass of the bell jar was opaque, though it was apparent to Genda that the clear fluid from the machine was pumping into it. Arkenter's vision was hard to follow, at this point becoming more and more sporadic, looking from the monitor to his hands, back to the door behind him. The hands keyed a command that made the glass of the bell jar lucid, quickly dissolving the gray coloring and displaying the interior contents. Arkenter's vision pushed in on it, moving closer. Genda hit pause on the log, paralleling Arkenter's inquisitive look. It was a heart, which in modern terms was nothing too remarkable to manufacture, though still hard to come by. But this heart was different. It, just like the surrounding room, was white. A pale, pallid, colorless pulsing organ floating freely in its crystal chamber. Colored organs were nothing too unique, actually a fairly common practice for external organs that buyers might like to show off. But why color a heart? Genda thought. It was obviously of some importance, considering Arkenter's want to rid himself of the very memory that Genda was creating. He scrubbed forward again, watching Arkenter's vision as he removed the chamber containing the heart, placed it into a worn leather bag, exited the facility, and made his way to what looked to Genda like the Quandis Skyrail station on the lower west end of Gorochi. The motion of the sight deck was making Genda queasy. The view was swinging all over the place, Arkenter's paranoia in obvious full swing. Genda picked up his cup from the night before, which still sat on the living room floor next to his Gentek. He downed the leftover booze and returned to his monitor, resuming to the sight of Arkenter walking through a bustling hub block, likely Hanam Market, judging by the predominantly Korean faces passing the view of his sight deck. Arkenter pushed his way through the crowd. Here I've omitted Arkenter making a deal in which he sells the heart to an old Korean man. In exchange, he's given a large sum of yen, larger than Genda has seen in a very long time. Resuming the story. Genda kept the screen paused, a still image of the fattened stack of yen flickering on his monitor. Just the sight of all that yen made his blood pressure mount. The previous mystery dissipated. The wonder of the White Heart, the lab, who Arkenter was, all of it completely faded into the matrix with the rest of the data. All that fucking cash. His mind screamed a shrill, juvenile holler that ran straight down his spine to the tip of his cock. He was stupid to care so much for money. He knew it. But in a town like Orochi, that's all you live for, because it's quite literally all that keeps you living. Gendo scrubbed through the rest of the footage at hyperspeed, flash views of Arcenter making his way home, hands hiding the money in a pipe atop his shower, scribbling notes that seemed to be a roundabout form of instructions that only Arcenter himself would be able to decipher, leading him back to his buried treasure. Gendo was processing the data in a way comparable to a dog. Pipe, shower, note, drawer. His internal thoughts were drowned by the sound of a blaring cash ping, a bell frantically being beaten by a robotic monkey with a wrench, eyes spinning backflips as it pounded away, foaming at the mouth. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Gendo's eyes shot to the clock. 9:12:39. It hadn't even been a full 24 hours since the deletion of the logs. Quickly backtracking the data, Gendo snatched Arkenter's home location, and with the dull crunch of a lil pen mint, he was out the door. Chapter 4. Gendo wasn't a stranger to big yen deals. He'd worked plenty of jobs for high-profile gangsters, dealt with stacks of paper as large as the one sitting above Arkenter's shower. But these were contract gigs, anonymity out the window. They knew exactly where their money was going, and the exact face to search for if they suddenly decide they want it back. Arcenter was a private interest, a possible avenue for Gento to get his hands on some untraceable yen. The rhythmic clack of the Skyrail tracks vibrated from beneath Gendo's seat, his mind taking each sound and synchronizing it with the vision of yen bills slapping down on the table. He was entranced by the visual, but soon found the daydream interrupted by a vibrating pulse coming from the breast pocket of his jacket. He fished out his phone, and the letters NANNIE scrolled across its screen. He hit accept. I'm on the rail, I might lose you. A couple of guys came looking for you again. Expecting anyone today? Gendo thought for a moment. I don't think so. Yeah, figured. As for Skiff, direct. Gendo exhaled. If they were on a Skiff, Arcenter was surely already getting his shit kicked in. Did they ask about Arcenter, that guy from yesterday? Nah, I didn't get too much docking done before I told him to get the fuck out. Why, what was that job all about? Gendo debated telling Nan about the deck footage. Just a deletion gig? Figured there would be some guys following up. Arcenter mentioned people were after the data. Well, nothing to grab from those eyes now. Did you catch a look at it? His punks were dressed pretty nice. No, guy was in a rush. Just wiped the log he told me to, trashed my footage, and then I booked it. Damn. If these pretty boys are after that data, I bet that shit would have been worth $1. The Skyrail screeched to a halt, the doors opening to a flood of guaros falling over each other as a broken automation announced their arrival to Hanam Square. Hey, I gotta go. Let me know if anyone else comes. Yep. You might want to go by a different user for a minute. Yeah, I was thinking Nan12. Yeah, fuck off. Just be careful, kid. Will do, Gendo said, standing to push his way out of the rail car. It was no surprise to find the door of Arkenter's flat already ajar. The place was sure to have been cased if the punks after him had any sense to start with their target's house. Gendo pushed the door open slowly, peeking around the short corridor that led to a living room he recognized from the snippets of Arkenter's side deck footage. Only this time, in the center of the floor, the lifeless body of Arcenter himself lay sprawled out across the carpet in a pool of placid blood. Gendo stood still, pausing to listen for noise. Nothing but the static whir of an air conditioning unit. He shut the front door behind him with an elbow, creeping his way into the room. Arkenter's body was uncomfortably positioned in the center of the space, a clear execution-style scene. One shot in the back, out through the heart. His eyes had been gouged. Genda looked down onto the stagnant body. Arkenter's corpse was a sight that Genda had prepared himself to find from the minute he left Hanam Station, but the sight of it still felt surreal. It wasn't the first dead body he'd seen, but it had been a welcome few years since the last one. He stared into the blood-darkened eye sockets, trying to piece together a timeline. If Heavy showed up to Nan's within the last hour, this murder had occurred at least a few hours previous. They must have already scanned Arkenter's site deck and found traces of his conversations with Skiff. Genda looked down. Clutched in Arkenter's rigid hand, he could see the crumpled remnants of pink paper, the remainder of the instruction sheet that Arcenter had crafted for himself. As if the outcome wasn't already clear enough, Genda stood and walked towards the bathroom. Gutted to shit. A gurgled cry emanated from the back of his head, and Genda once again felt the all-too-familiar feeling of a cash dream burning away. He bit down on his cheek, stifling a scream that was dying to escape his throat. Fuck. Of course they took the money. Why would a street-illiterate geek like Arcenter possess the ability to keep money like that out of the hands of Yakuza? He hid it in his own goddamn bathroom, Genda thought. He turned back towards Arkenter's corpse. The images of his sight deck flipped through his mind, a flashing montage of stills like a deck of cards being shuffled. Hands, faces, bed, shower, tram, streets, yen. And on the final card of the deck, an image of a pale, white heart. Chapter 5. You still talk to Yaniba? Genda pushed his way through Hanam Square, sucking down a julep meal drink while Nan spoke. The fuck would I still talk to that hag? All she has ever done is rip me off. I'm just curious about something. What, did that job yesterday finally convince you to get some implants of your own? It would be pretty nice to finally remember where the fuck I put things. Genda sat on a bench outside of a noodle shop. The smell of the broth made his stomach yearn for an actual meal, a yearning he promptly drowned with a thick slurp of the julep. Like hell, I'm not trying to get my shit monitored. Then what gives? Finally gonna get a bigger dick, aren't you? What's with the fucking prodding? Do you talk to her anymore or not, Nan? A moment of silence. Genda looked down on his phone, making sure their call was still connected. Hello? Yes? Do you still talk to Yaniba? I sort of feel like I could use an apology before I answer that question. Genda heard the sound of the julep can crunch in his hand before he even realized his grip had tightened on it. Pulling the phone away from his ear, he let out a heavy sigh, clenching his eyes so tight that he felt as if his eyes were going to pop back into his skull. With a stupid, plastered smile, he returned to the phone. Did you take a good breath, Skiffo? Nan jeered. Don't push it, Nan. I am sorry. Thank you. That's very kind. Apology accepted. Great, you're welcome. Now can you please... Yeah, Nan coughed. I haven't talked to her in a while because, she's a huge cunt, but I'll give you her contact. Thanks. But we could find better people if you're looking for a street implant, you know that. She's good, but she's a total sketch. It's kind of just what I'm looking for. Just send me her address, Genda said, tossing his empty julep can into the back of a passing junkie's aluminum trolley. Okay. Without prodding. What's going on, Gen? I deserve to know a little bit with these little bitch boys coming into my shop looking for you. I'm not stupid in thinking this is connected. It's kind of a lot to explain. Let's just grab a drink in an hour or so. Sins. Does that sound cool? Yeah, that's cool. Maybe have one before. Not a bad idea. Alright, I'll ship you Yaniba's info now. Thanks, Nan. And with a click, Genda was returned to the bustle of the streets. Dust, dirt, and carbon filled his senses, engines and barking civilians crowding the rest. He wasn't looking forward to meeting with Yaniba, the old pervert, but she was just the person he needed to talk to if he was going to get info on organ sales. She'd never been particularly rude to Genda, only meeting him in passing while meeting with Nan. At the time, Nan was trying to get fitted for a new arm, something organic, rather than the rusted limb he'd been fitted with for the last half-decade. But according to Nan, she'd strung him along the whole way. Bullshit consults, paying service fees and shipping costs and all sorts of shit, only for her to eventually pull out due to some purported IRA interest in her whereabouts. The kicker, of course, being that she cited Nan's previous investments as non-refundable. Some mess about inherent risk and all that. Nan was damn near flipping her to the IRA himself, but thought twice given his involvement, not just with her, but plenty of other Gorochi Street that would probably not be too happy to find that one of their own was a rat, especially if he'd ratted over an amount of money as negligible as Nan's investments to Yaniba. But Nan was a hard-working guy, busted his ass and earned about every speck of rust on that shit arm he wore on his shoulder. He was straight, but God be damned if he didn't still make his money with an honest word, at least to those he trusted. And he still kicked himself over trusting an old punk like Yaniba. It wasn't a lot of money, sure, but money sure feels a lot more valuable when stolen, and that goes both ways. She was strangely better looking than Genda remembered. A pale, gaunt, but strangely taut-skinned Korean woman looked back at Genda as he walked through her door, the ringing of a makeshift chime of dangling porcelain fingers signaling his arrival. She grinned a toothish smile up at him, her teeth pearly as the day they came, which Genda wouldn't put it more than a year ago. As to be expected with any organ sales personnel, Yaniba was one to dabble in her own supply. Her dreadlocks, an obvious sign of follicular implants, her eyes a piercing, deep, unnatural yellow, and most notably her fingers, long, smooth, and pointed, curling back towards her, one after the other, as she beckoned Genda to come deeper into her smoke-filled den. "I'm not sure there's much I can do for you, young man," she said with a sinewy smirk. Genda stifled a scoff. "Well, maybe we could do something with the hair," she continued. "I'm not looking for cosmetics." She raised an eyebrow and repositioned her gaze downwards, the weighty jewelry around her neck jingling into a new position. "This is a cosmetic shop, boy." Yaniba lit a smoke, eyeing Genda as if to scare him off. Once again, he stood unfazed by her theatrics. "We've met before if you'd rather save your energy. I know you deal. Do I actually look like a fucking narc to you?" Yaniba's smirk faintly crawled its way back up the edges of her thin lips. "I used to run with Nan. You were going to get him an arm?" "That infant of a man," she said, exhaling a smoke cloud that reeked of sour lavender. "And no, too thin to be a narc. Too pale." She stood, straightening the thin silk robe that hung delicately over her shoulders. She was taller than Genda remembered, more likely due to a new enhancement rather than his poor memory. She took a drag of her smoke and walked towards him. "You look like a healthy baby. Why do you need new organs, You drink too much?" She looked him up and down, her yellowed eyes settling on his groin. She smiled, slowly bringing her gaze back up to his. "I'm sure you're just fine there, but I can give you a second opinion." "How hard is it to get something like a heart?" Genda said. Yaniba let out a dry, hearty cackle. She settled back on Genda, giving him a pitiful smile that pissed him off and turned him on, all at the same time. She was old, but she made most every attempt she could to mask it. Sometimes it was an uncanny and sort of creepy look, but on certain days, a slutty street-modded woman seemed sort of intriguing to Genda in an off-limits sort of way. Typically, women like this didn't go for a scrawny net boy like him, but every once in a while, the modded street chic ladies found Genda's normalcy intriguing. Never meant to last, just a taste of things lost to them, he supposed. With Yaniba, it seemed like a classic spider in the fly scenario. "You're so adorably clueless," Yaniba said, lighting a new smoke. "What would a little boy like you need with a 7th heart, Is Mommy finally dying?" "It's none of your business what I need it for," Genda said, through a cloud of her exhaled vapor. Yaniba continued eating him with her gaze, relishing the challenge of a tenacious youngster. "It's very much my business. I offer my services because I like to help people. That's why the service I offer is a premium service. I'm no street punk." She turned, walking back to her desk, making no attempt to pull her falling robe back up over her shoulder. "So tell me, boy." "Genda," he interjected. She sat and slowly turned back towards him, her lips once again curling upward. The exact reaction Genda has expected. The sexy youngster archetype wasn't the rarest of hands for him to be dealt in a shithole like Orochi, but not one he often played. However, with an old hornball like Yaniba, it was just the move. He marked her hardened nipples, now signaling her attention from underneath her thin robe. "Genda," she said with a thirsting purr. "Tell me, what would you want with a heart, Genda?" Her robe had now fallen down to her elbows, resting in the arms of her chair. Genda couldn't help but study the seams on her shoulders, which traveled down, curving underneath her exposed breasts and connecting in the center of her chest. The classic sign of a mod bod, segmented perfection. Her skin was near perfect, a soft, pale flowing down to her hardened pink mahogany areola that Genda couldn't help but feel a craving towards, even if it was just an illusion. She smiled at his apparent temptation. "Come, you can trust me, Genda." He repositioned his jacket, trying to break his gaze as naturally as possible, reminding himself to keep the power. "I have an interested party, someone in Sec 12 wanting to sell it or something. It's an anonymous transaction, I'm just a deal maker trying to make some yen," he said, pretending to study the display optic implants on the shelf to his left. "Aren't we all?" She sat back, spreading her legs in a propositional display, the seams on her thighs snaking down towards her vagina. Genda swallowed. "Coy boy," she croaked. "I might know someone, but information like that typically costs a few." "How much?" Genda asked, a question that needed no answering. Yaniba stood and walked towards him, now wearing nothing but her synthetic skin and the jewelry around her neck. "You're trying to make money, aren't you? Why not save some yen?" She lit a smoke between her lips, taking a slow pull before placing it between Genda's. She exhaled a plume of smoke downwards onto her chest that slowly lofted up between her yellowed eyes and his. "You're a deal maker, after all, aren't you, Genda?" Chapter 6. "You fucked her." Nan took a hearty gulp of his regular elixir, a browned concoction of various liquors that only he and the barkeep at Sen's knew. A secret recipe that no one was asking for, and one that Nan never hesitated to force onto an innocent bargoer, Must have got some new work done, that fucking shapeshifter, he cackled, spitting the brown juice out onto the bar. Genda covered his drink. I didn't. It just took some coaxing. Nan wiped his mouth, turning to Genda with a knowing grin. Come on, Gen. I know how she gets around youngins. And I know she doesn't dish out info to whoever the fuck walks in, he said, taking another swig. I hate the bitch, but if I'm being honest, it's probably due in part to the fact that she never fuck a big old rust pile like me. Genda shook his head, taking a sip from his glass. Synth pussy is something else, I do know that much. I don't care who it's on, Nan said, a drunken, reminiscent smirk smeared across his gob. His drink smelled like shit, but it worked fast and well, that much was obvious. Do you want to hear what she told me or not? Genda said, turning a face to Yan. Yeah, Nan said, but you still haven't even told me what you were there for in the first place. Genda took a sip of his drink, looking around as he swallowed slowly. I'm looking for a heart. Nan looked back at him blankly. Shit. Are you fucking dying? Yesterday, that geek, Argenter, Oh shit, you nabbed some deck? Nan blurted. Let me finish, Genda said. Nan leaned in closer, trying to stifle his excitement. Yeah, Genda continued. I did. The guy wanted a whole day wiped, so I grabbed the whole day. Turns out the guy was some scientist, made a deal with some street, probably the goons that came in looking for me. He was dealing a heart. Nan's brows furrowed. A fucking heart. Damn, he said. Genda leaned in again. So this whole day, he's running all over the place with the thing. Sells it to some guy in the lower west. Takes the money back to his place, piles. Throws it up over his shower. Genda turns to take a sip of his drink. He's fucked, huh? Nan scoffed. That's where I was headed when you called me this morning. Guy's place was cased. He was sprawled dead when I got there. They grabbed the yen, even took his fucking eyes. Nan looked down at his drink. Damn, he said. Genda ran his hands through his hair. So anyways, I figured the next best thing is to get hands on that fucking heart, Nan said, sucking down a hearty gulp. Alright. Explains visiting the old she-synth. Yeah, Genda continued. Figured she could help offer me a tip on the buyer, whoever the fuck Argenter was. Nan nodded slowly, still processing. And? Genda downed the rest of his drink, fished a metallic card from his pocket, and placed it on the bar as the booze slid down his throat. Nan grinned his classic dirty smile. It's a good thing I kept his hand dirty then, isn't it? He said, and tossed back the last of his brew.